Hi, you're welcome back. It's the 15th of September 2022. Weather in Ireland is still good. Starting to get a little cold, but still very good. Good weather, good dry weather, a little bit of rain, but not much. So it's good for getting jobs done about a farm or anywhere else, and a bit of concrete or paving or whatever has to be done. This is video 47 is Ukraine update. Well, basically, folks, at the beginning, I predicted that the war in the Ukraine would be no quick fix. It wouldn't be over anyway anytime soon, and that is true. That's what has happened. It's dragged on now for a long time, and it looks like it'll be still there by the end of the year. One of the things is I did predict, and this is not my own view. This is a military view, and that is that if the Ukraine didn't make some kind of an inroad and some kind of a counterattack on Russia by the end of the summer, they'd be in serious problems, because it is not easy launch attacks of the nature they need to launch during bad weather. So Russia could really just get stuck in, as it were, although that has its implications as well. But anyway, I'm glad to say that there is a little bit of good news. They are fighting unbelievably well. They're taking heavy casualties. It's a cruel war. It's very hard on people. It's hard on Russian people too, because their sons are being conscripted into the army and are not being seen anymore, and they're upset, and it's causing a lot of rancor and a lot of problems for Putin. In the end of the day, he attacked a neighbouring country that did nothing on him really, except a little bit of things about native Russians. But other than that, it wasn't probably justified what he did. And now questions are being asked everywhere. What's the point of it all? And I've also said, if he were to win at least half of the Ukraine, how would he hold it in the long term? Not that easy. Now, there's no doubt he went straight for Kiev, the capital, when he went in first, and he didn't succeed. They repelled him. They put up a good battle there. And the idea was that he'd take over Kiev, and that he'd either capture the government of Zelensky, or they'd drive them out and install their own regime. But Zelensky, in fairness to him, is still there, and he's still holding on. This week, the EU handed him €9 billion, quite a lot of money. The US has given 40 billion a while back, and I don't know where they're getting it all, but it seems to be having an effect. They're getting good weapons and good food and getting everything else. So I think if you were to give the test, have the Ukrainians made a counterattack by the end of the summer? And the answer is they have. They've ticked that box, so they're not out by any means. They're still in with a chance, according to that measure. In other words, they're fighting well, and they're fighting back by the end of summer. That doesn't mean they're home and dry, but it means that they're at least in there. Now, one of the things is that Putin made a speech the other day, and it wasn't reported at all. The Western media doesn't appear to report it. It was the equivalent of the G20 in the East. And he made the point about ships. There are a lot of ships. They came to an agreement between Turkey and the Ukraine and Russia, and they're letting ships go through, getting through. Now, bear in mind, it was the Ukraine that mined the water, but anyway, they're getting the ships through. But he said that his part of the deal was that the grain would go to everybody based on need, and that it wouldn't all go to Europe and to rich countries. But he says only 3% went to poor countries. And this means that there could be still a famine in places like Egypt and the Sudan and places like that get this food, and maybe North Africa and places like that. So if they've done that now, that's a greedy thing to do, to take all the grain, more or less all the grain. I wouldn't put it past them. It wasn't the right thing to do. They should have let at least 25% of it go to people who are in need more, and do the thing the right way. That was the deal you struck. They should have kept with it. But you're dealing with two strange sides, two sides that none of us, most of my viewers here, wouldn't approve of, because both of them are wrong, and they should have let the grain go to everybody and keep it flowing and keep it coming. Now there's a danger that deal will fall through and there'll be no grain. So that's that. Of course, the gas is cut off, and there's an impending fuel shortage, and it's causing great concern. Unfortunately, you would think that it would make them say, well, where's all the renewable energy? It doesn't seem to be working. But actually, the European Parliament yesterday voted to double or triple the amount of renewable energy, windmills, solar farms, and everything else. And not one in that Parliament, and I think there are 600 and something MEPs in it. Not one asked the question, what function is it serving? You'd think somebody would ask that. Anyway, that's the story. It's a bitter war at this stage. Zelensky will not accept anything except the total return of all the captured lands and the Crimea at this moment. He's getting quite cocky. The other thing is that Putin and the Russians are getting great help from Chechnya, a Muslim country. And Chechnya was at war with Russia, and after the breakup of the Soviet Union, the Russians tried to bully them. And some of the Chechnyan armed forces are in Ukraine fighting for Russia, and a big load of the Chechnyan soldiers are in Moscow because Putin can trust them better than he can trust his own people. He's afraid he'll be attacked. So the Chechenyans are now doing to Ukraine what the Russians did to them. They're fighting for the Russians. It's reported that one senior Chechnyan military man who grew up in the troubles way back when the troubles was on. I think it was the late 80s, 1980s, early 90s, and he looked at some family that had been driven out of their home, and the kids was crying, and it reminded him of himself. He and his people were attacked and driven out by the Russians, and here he is in attacking the Ukraine. So they're not all that happy. But it is the Chechnyan leader. He's a tough looking guy, but very often a lad like that had a sense of fairness. I mean, why is he doing this? What's he getting out of it? Fighting for the Russians, against the Ukraine. Maybe he feels he's a grievance against Israel and America. I don't know, but in any event, his own people, the Muslims, are getting badly treated in China, and Putin and China is two peas in a pod. So there's an area to look at. But I think that the patience for Putin is wearing thin. He holds Russia in an iron grip, but there's nobody following him. He has no leadership qualities. There's no one cheering him on or anything else. I'd say they're just afraid of him, and that's the way it is. The economy in Russia too is taking terrible walloping because the sanctions are really affecting that place. A lot of the best and brainiest are leaving, and the sanctions are having a very big impact. And a report to Mr. Putin recently by economists in Russia itself warned of an impending economic disaster there if this war goes on. He's probably the kind of a fella, he's probably belligerent, and he just won't listen to anyone until the whole thing maybe goes pear-shaped. I wouldn't accept that Russia can't stick it economically and all that. Countries can do a lot if they have good leadership, and if the leaders are supported by the people. We saw that in Britain during the war, where Churchill was supported. I mean, they liked him. They didn't vote for him after the war, but he had leadership qualities, and they were prepared to fight for him. But Churchill too had a whole heap of industry. He had a coal industry, he had a steel industry, he had a whole lot of industrial power behind him. So when he went to war against Germany, he had something. It wasn't just he wasn't just begging somebody else. He had the whole way of manufacturing all the things he needed. And the factories that were making the munitions and that, the soldiers went off to war, the men and the women moved in and kept making the ammunition. So he had some power behind him. And nowadays Europe has nothing. Europe is not doing well. It's looking at a terrible situation with its factories, having to shut them down and stop making aluminium and stop making steel and making components and glass and all that. So they don't have the power, but that's their own fault. They're the ones who turned against industrial output and industrial production and against fossil fuel, and now they have the problem of it. Nobody wins in these kind of wars. It would be nice if Ukraine came out of it in the one piece and as the country they originally held. I myself would put up with a bit of hardship to see that. I don't like to see, as an Irish person, a small country being invaded by by a big neighbour. Shouldn't be happening in this day and age. Anyway, that's my story, lads. Doesn't mean that it's all over. It doesn't mean that Putin's beaten now by any standard. It means that it's on a sort of a knife edge, but at least the Ukrainians have passed the test. They have ticked the box. They have got to the beginning of winter, more or less, and they have made a substantial counter-offensive. That's just a box ticked. It's just something achieved, and we'll see how it goes from there. Folks, that's it. Give me a thumbs up, please, or thumbs down. We'll see you back for something else in a while. Thank you very much.